Welcome to the show and a brand new week. IB Nation Sports Talk up and rolling on Monday. Along with Jesse Stiers, I'm Sean Stiers. We're splitting this sucker up today. Jesse's going to do the first part of the show. Vince is going to jump in with a little rapid fire, and I'll just stay in this seat the whole time.
A lot of timing and coordination today.
Yes. Key on the timing. Jesse's back from South Bend in Chicago. I'm back from beautiful Southern California. Spent a few days in San Diego. And tell you what, I was not feeling it this morning. I bet you weren't either. I think everybody had a pretty bad case of Mondays today.
I definitely had the Monday scaries. Got home at 1 a.m., got up at 6 a.m., and that's just how the day got rolling. And for you, it's like I can't even imagine because you never got adjusted in California, and then you were coming back, and then now it's like, did you even sleep? Because your body's on like 2 different schedules in 3 days.
Didn't feel like I slept this morning when I woke up. Didn't feel like it at all. USMA 87 says he just got back from Norway. Man,
that sounds fun.
Arms are tired. Yeah. He said he woke up at 2 a.m. due to body clock issues. Yeah, I remember like when we did that Paris thing, it was the same way. It's like took all week, sort of finally was getting adjusted at the end of the week, and then it was time to come home and you do it all over again, coming the other way.
I will say though, Wrigley was quite nice. A little chilly as we sat under the awning. That's also like 60 degrees on June 1st. What's happening? It's horrible. It's just chilly. Like I was like, what am I doing?
I was going to say, it was 42 degrees this morning on June 2nd here in South Bend. It's a lot nicer.
I was telling Naomi, right when we go to Wrigley in the summer, it's always a benefit to sit in that 88 area because it's always blazing hot, and we're at least underneath that shade. And I was like, this is the first time that the shade has bit us, I guess. But the Cubs won, and that's all that matters. And they won so convincingly.
That's true. I saw that, I guess Ellie Dela Cruz's sister passed away before the game. Did you hear about that?
No, but he smoked that home run.
Yeah, at the end of the game. And I guess he was doing the, like point, that was for his sister, I guess.
Didn't know that.
Andre noticing the Top Gun shirt. I got this on the USS Midway. We went to the Midway Museum, and they were selling Top Gun stuff. They were actually selling an Iceman t-shirt. It was a little too busy. I almost got it. Your mom discouraged me, so I just went with straight up Top Gun.
You shouldn't have let her. She doesn't like the flashy fun things.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Key on the fun things. Oh, great weekend. Great weekend, though. All right, so because I was gone at the end of last week, I missed out on
the
Marcus Freeman little media meetup, but Vince and Brian were amongst the locals who were there. And it wasn't, it was a little different because it wasn't the traditional live stream, the press conference on YouTube, so everybody gets to hear it. It was, just a couple of small groups of local media getting to fire off some questions to the head coach. It was all on the record, of course, and, everybody was able to record it and all that kind of stuff. And so Vince had his recorder in there, and he sent me the audio. I was able to listen to the whole thing. And have you
Vince read to work for once?
That's right. That's right, baby. Vince got to earn his keep on around here. Have you seen many of the comments that Marcus Freeman had?
Zero comments. I've been saving it for this show so you can get my true, authentic initial reaction. And
all right,
I got the pen and paper out. I like to listen, write down keywords. Won't forget anything. So let's get into it.
Well, so I'll play this. I'll play it, and I'll let you write your keywords, and then you can come up for air, and you can just like train of thought, spontaneity. Just tell us what you think, I guess. So we will start with Steve Angeli. He had some comments on the former Notre Dame quarterback as well as the 2 remaining current quarterbacks, C.J. Carr and Kenny Minchey, and we'll hear that cut here about Carr and Minchey in a minute. But we'll just start with the conversation. How did it go with Steve Angeli at the end of the spring the conversation that ultimately led to Steve Angeli hitting the transfer portal and eventually ending up at Syracuse.
Listen, what Steve Angeli has done for this program in his 3 years or 3 or 4 years has been amazing, right? And I'm a huge fan of Steve Angeli, huge fan. We had a competition in the spring, and that competition wasn't answered after 14 practices. And I think you have to have honest conversations with those guys in that room, and that's what I did. And at the end of the day, Steve made the decision to transfer where there was probably a better opportunity for him to, nothing's guaranteed, but a better opportunity for him to be the starter in the fall, right? And there's more clear picture. And so that's why he made that decision, and he's graduated, and there was no hard feeling. It was sadness for me because I love Steve Angeli as a person and a football player, but I support him because it was the right decision for Steve.
So did your keywords begin with furious typing in the background? Or
it's a nice effect. I feel like I'm actually in there. It gives good setting.
Right. Court stenographer in the room, jotting or cranking everything out as they go. So what were your keywords? What jumped out at you there?
So as I was writing stuff down, I saw Marcus Freeman did kind of the typical compliment sandwich. He started with something nice,
right?
With Steve Angeli, talked about how he was this amazing person and a big fan of Steve Angeli. So obviously, Marcus Freeman being the guy that he is going to say good things relatively about Angeli, and then just talks about kind of goes into the negative part of it of just having to be honest, going through 14 practices, and it being a competition. And I guess as fans and people who root for the program and need the quarterback position to kind of take that next step, that's honestly what you want, is a true competition, no biasy, 14 practices.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing where everyone is at. You're throwing everything else out the window, and you're evaluating what's best for your team, based off of these 14 practices, and obviously what's going to happen this fall. And so, it was clear to them that Steve Angeli was not going to be the guy and potentially not even be the second guy. And so you have the honest conversation with them, which you respect as a player. So Steve can go on. And like he said, too, he's graduated. So he got to play for Notre Dame. He's got his degree from Notre Dame, and now potentially he can go somewhere else and play. So, obviously you always want to be a starter, wherever you're at. But Steve Angeli had a good career at Notre Dame. He served kind of his role on the team, and now potentially you can go somewhere else and do something better.
It's the world we live in, like guys can hit the transfer, guys can hit the transfer portal at any time. Now, obviously during the 2 windows, but they can go, that's not the way this went, but what you want is transparency and for the coach to be honest with you. And that's the conversation that Marcus Freeman had. It's never an easy conversation, but it's one that he has to have. And, we'll kind of talk more about the culture and stuff like that of the Notre Dame program. But I think it, that it definitely helps, like just the fact that Marcus Freeman is so honest and open, with all the players about just where they stand. Because the opposite of that is he feeds him a line of bull, just trying to keep him to stay, just to make sure that he has an adequate depth chart. They didn't go that direction. They didn't lie to him. He was honest with him, and had an adult conversation with him, and ultimately let him go his way. You got a little strobe going there with your lighting situation, or like you're going back and forth from lightness to dark.
It just must be the time of day, or it might be trying to like focus or something. But no, I do not have a strobe going on.
All right. So that kind of closes the book on Steve Angeli from the Notre Dame perspective until Syracuse comes back to town in November. And obviously how much Steve Angeli becomes, there'll be at least some Steve Angeli story when it happens. How big the story is going to depend on, is Steve Angeli starting / playing, and how good is he doing at that point? Just how big the story is when he comes back to town. Brian says the team would be better with Angeli as the backup, but he wants a chance to start somewhere. Yeah, I mean, probably, the first choice would be to have a veteran quarterback with that kind of experience, but he's too far along. Like you said, he's got his degree, and you can't expect anyone in that situation just to continue to want to sit and fight for whatever, scraps and reps are left over at the end of the day. He wants a chance to play. I don't think anybody begrudges him that at all. So the two guys who are here, CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey. And Marcus Freeman talked a little bit about getting them ready to go, whoever the starter ends up being, with virtually zero experience between them.
They're both high ceiling guys. They are highly intelligent, highly talented football players. But they also lack in-game experience, as you just said. Like, there's no substitution for that. And so how do I create as many game-like situations for them during fall camp? It's going to be really important. But I think they both are really high-ceiling guys, talented, and maybe different in certain areas, certain aspects. But when you look at the overall picture of the quarterback, right, they're both really talented individuals.
All right. So you heard him say ceiling height. Do you have something to say first?
No.
Okay.
I'm just excited about this.
Okay. All right. You heard him say their ceiling is high. So I guess, do you have any concern about their floor, especially considering the first two games are against Miami and Texas A&M?
So I don't have too much of concerns about their floor, because if there was concerns about their floor, then that would mean Steve Angeli's, like, we know what Steve Angeli's floor is, right? Mm-hmm. And if that was what Notre Dame was comfortable with leaving, then clearly that floor is probably better than whatever Steve Angeli was at the end of the day. So I like the fact that there's a confidence in, this whole kind of experience thing isn't going to be a factor. Like, someone has to make their first start at some point.
At some point, exactly.
Johnny Manziel had to make his first start. Jameis Winston had to make his first start. Go through the list of really good college quarterbacks, Cam Newton, and oftentimes they are younger because they are so talented. Tim Tebow. These are all guys that play starters for 2 to 3 seasons. And I'm talking about starters during the time where there wasn't transfer portals. It was like true 4 to 5 years maybe you had out of college, right? So I don't really see this being an issue. And I see this this is more so on the coaching staff. And like Marcus Freeman said, getting his players ready for game-like situations. What can you do to simulate those high-pressure, high-intensity game-like, situations? That's on a coaching staff. But he's got the tools to be a really good quarterback. The coaching staff just needs to get him ready for those what we're going to call big-time moments early on in the season.
Yeah, I have no concern about the floor as well, because, like you said, I think the floor for Steve Angeli was, even though he didn't make horrendous mistakes in his time on the field, but again, obviously his actual live situations were fairly limited. We saw no real fatal flaws, but we did see, like taking the sacks and those kind of things. And when it turns into that, like if those kind of things are happening more frequently, that's also at some point going to lead to more turnovers and those kind of things, and like, we don't have to go deep down this road, but we've talked about the fact that first sack against Penn State, the ball was on the ground and it could have been a huge turnover at that point in the game. And the way the game played out, had it not been recovered by a Notre Dame offensive lineman, and I think that the floor for either Minchey or Carr, it's just going to look a lot different, because their feel for the game, especially Carr, just seems so different compared to Steve Angeli. So I'm not concerned about that. There is a legit concern, about them getting, especially playing a road game, your first career start as a quarterback, the most important position on the field. And Freeman you heard him talk about putting them in as many simulated live situations as possible in practice. How far do you think that can go?
I think that has to go really far when you're considering, the question at hand of these guys being first-time starters potentially. And the reason why I say that is because there's nothing that can prepare you quite like the intensity at practice. And so that's on kind of the coaching staff and the players to bring that intensity of, basically iron sharpens iron at practice. And so and then preparation as well is what's going to basically eliminate kind of those factors of, the road, a crowd, the noise going on around you. None of that stuff affects you when you're dominating, and domination comes from preparation. The noise only comes when you're not prepared and you're doubting yourself. Like when you're having that internal dialogue of, oh, am I doing this right? Like you're going to succumb to the pressure of what's going on around you. And so if Notre Dame can bring that intensity and know, okay, I've gone against better in practice. I can block this guy from Miami across me. I can run. Jeremiah Love can hit a hole and run over a linebacker. Like I've gone against better because we've brought the intensity and had hard simulated practices. And again, like that doubt doesn't creep in where you're not confident, and that comes through the preparation.
And the bulk of that stuff is going to come, especially the first couple of weeks during training camp when they're doing the good versus good, the ones versus ones and the twos versus twos, and you're doing a lot more live periods and scrimmages and those kind of things. And, you're able to dial, that was one of the reasons that both Notre Dame's offensive line and the quarterbacks the last few years have been so well prepared, is because they're going up against Al Golden's defense. And when's Al Golden going to dial up a blitz? Where's he going to bring it from? Like all those things. Like if you can get some confidence going up against that, you can get confidence going up against just about, any other defense in the country. Now, there is a variable in that Al Golden is gone. And just like there'll be some questions about what Chris Ash and his game calling and that kind of thing looks like, how much, will there be any drop off in their ability to do that? But I just think like the live stuff, even though it's practice, because you can talk about crowd noise and pumping it in and all those things. I think that's like every football player. Yeah. Like every football player is going to go through that.
You just have to figure out the snap count. The snap count's the only important thing when it gets loud.
Right. Right. And nothing we have seen from either of these quarterbacks shows, would make you think that they're going to be swayed by like that kind of thing, like I don't even want to say pressure, but just like, being in a big, loud environment and that kind of, and like, again, like go back to last year when Notre Dame went to Texas A&M, they had full confidence in starting a true freshman at left tackle. And that ended up working out, pretty well for him. And part of that is because of what they put him through in practice. And it's just the more you can do it live in practice, even though it is practice, it just becomes second nature at some point. Now you can't prepare for each and every situation, but yeah, it becomes a habit. That's exactly right. So I think they'll be fine. Like you said, Johnny Manziel had to make his first start at some point. Jameis Winston had to make his first start at some point. Every quarterback has had to make his first start at some point. And I don't think that like too many people get worked up over really a handful of reps, carrying bigger meaning when you're going into whatever your first season as a starter and that kind of thing ends up being.
Well, and also you got to realize that they still have the ability, if it's Kenny Minchey or CJ Carr, to fall back on a really good running game, what's going to be a solid offensive line, and a really talented and good defense that we all anticipate. So there's things to kind of help take the load off, essentially. And I think the thing is as fans and everyone else, like we can't expect whoever it is to come out on the first drive and just absolutely tear it up, like then you start kind of like that spiral mindset of, oh, he wasn't ready or anything. Like just let it kind of play out and we'll see how it goes. But I think that it's a huge benefit that they have so many other things clicking around them that are stable, like position group wise, the other side of the ball. Like it's not like this is a young quarterback starting in a fire, a dumpster fire where he's expected to kind of raise the team out of a 6-6 season or, you know, a bad season. Like, there's still a lot of other really good things going around on the team. They just need the quarterback to potentially elevate its game to take the team to the next level as well.
Yeah. But you know, people are going to be freaking out if they don't score on their first drive.
Or if there's an interception of some sort.
Oh, man. You said it. You spoke it into the air. I can't believe you just did that. Someone's going to write this down and remember it and bring it back to you later on. All right, some other topics that Marcus Freeman went through. Notre Dame's players talked throughout the college football playoff run about how the team's culture is what wins. And so how do they make sure that culture continues to matter when the current college model is steadily becoming more professional-like with players making money?
There's still a lot of similarities between what college football is becoming and the NFL. I still think culture wins in the NFL. I do. I think as you look at some of the successful franchises or organizations in the NFL, it's still culture. And so because they're making money, like, that has no difference in the culture you are creating in the building. The money you make is the money you make. When you walk into our building, the culture is like what you should feel. The culture is what is demanded around here, and that's how we operate around here. It doesn't matter how much money you make. You're not treated that way. Right? You're not treated any differently, no matter if you're making more money than this person or if your role's bigger than this person. You know, it's you're treated the way you go about your business. And I think that's important. So that's what I believe in. Like, the culture is what you feel. I can tell you what our culture is. It doesn't matter. It's like what you feel when you're in this building. And what you feel is going to be not determined on what money you make.
All right. A lot of culture talk there. What were your keywords that you wrote down?
So it was a lot of the same stuff, but I thought there was some interesting kind of, bits in there. I do agree that the culture is going to win overall, no matter what. Like, that's no one looks at good NFL teams and says, oh, like, what are these guys making comparatively? You look at, again, how the culture is, and you look at some of the best NFL teams in the last 5-ish years, you could say. As much as I dislike the Eagles, they had a really good culture there. You know, like, their offensive line, their offensive as a unit, like, just everything going on, they had a good culture. The Chiefs had a good culture. I think that's created by Mahomes and Kelsey. The Lions, obviously, with Dan Campbell. Like, it's no surprise that teams that establish that really good kind of family brotherhood culture are the teams that are going to succeed.
Do you think at the pro level, like you said, like the quarterback most likely is going to be the guy making the most money, or the star player is going to be the guy making the most money? In professional sports, though, it's accepted because everybody's making some money. So, like, do you think that there could be a little bit more jealousy at the college level, or do you think that guys, like a second or third string guy just accepts the fact, well, I'm number 2 on the depth chart, I'm number 3 on the depth chart, there's no way I'm going to make, as much NIL money as Riley Leonard or whoever it happens to be?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, what Marcus Freeman was talking about, of like going about your business, of your play is going to establish probably that sort of, tiering, I would say, of how much you're getting paid. And I think that's the perfect evaluation. But I think part of this question too is you have to look at the coaching staff and who they're recruiting and the character of the players that you're recruiting. So I think it takes a certain level of maturity in a recruit and a player kind of in this age range to say, hey, like, we're going to be honest with you. We're not going to give you flashy amounts of money. You'll still get money, of some sort. And if you play really well, you'll probably obviously
get more. That
can go up. And so that's on you. But we want you to know, like, that's not what we're all about here. We're building a culture to, go back to a national championship, to win a national championship, that sort of, situation. And so, again, that's on the coaches, in my opinion, to make sure that they're recruiting players that have high enough character to kind of understand what they're, pitching culture-wise at Notre Dame.
Yeah, and when you look at at just the culture itself. I mean, the team takes on the personality of the coach. You hear that all the time. And whether there's more money involved or not, that's how it feels with this, in Marcus Freeman's 3+ years now so far. And I mean, you look at the vast majority of the players who have transferred, a high majority of those guys are depth chart guys. It hasn't been a bunch of starters jumping into the portal because someone's throwing them a bunch of money. And I think that culture is a part of that, the culture that they have in this program. Now, recruits have decommitted because someone's throwing more money at them, but not current guys.
But you don't want those players.
That's exactly right. And that helps you. Yeah, that's like that. That weeds out. That lets you know that that's not the kind of culture fit that you wanted anyway.
If they're probably going to come, expect to play, expect more money. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that's 100% for everyone. That would be kind of, probably a little bit rude, but it's definitely going to be the case for at least probably 50% of those type of situations.
Right.
There's going to be continuous thorns in your side.
Right. Now, and like I remember back in the day when, when I was doing Notre Dame baseball, and we've talked about this before, college baseball, you have 11.7 scholarships, to distribute amongst your whole team. So virtually everyone is on some kind of partial scholarship. And I remember there was one year, this kid, came in, he did more than he was expected. He ended up, being a fairly significant guy, both from a hitting and a pitching standpoint, did a little bit of both, wasn't graded either, but he gave him a little bit of everything. And, so like, he's sort of outperforming, I think, maybe what some of the expectations were. So the first thing his dad does is go to the coaching staff and says, oh, can you give him more scholarship money? It wasn't obviously NIL money, but it's like, can you give him more money now? It's like, well, this is what you agreed upon when you came here. The scholarship limit is still the scholarship limit that we have to distribute over a whole roster. We can't just start throwing more money at you because you've maybe, overachieved a little bit for one season. And I think you can apply that, kind of to what's going on now in NIL as well. Like if that's the first thing that you do is come say, well, I need more now, or else I'm going to go jump someplace. Again, that's not the kind of guy that you probably want. Now, to your point though, as you steadily kind of climb that ladder and you are performing, I think that the way it's structured, guys pretty much can expect to see bumps, in their NIL revenue and that kind of thing, because the higher profile you have, the more of a draw you're going to be, and that's naturally going to set you up to have more NIL opportunities and those kind of things. So, but like, I just, again, kind of to the point you haven't heard about, we know that other schools have come after some of Notre Dame's guys, trying to get them, like tampering into the transfer portal with big loads of money and stuff like that. We've heard those rumors, but again, it hasn't worked. And I think that only happens, like you're only able to keep that thing together as tight as they have when you've got the right culture in place, because you've got the guys with the mindset, they're buying into all that. A little bit on Mike Mickens, Notre Dame's secondary coach. He, of course, had suitors for his services in the offseason. And, he didn't get the promotion after Al Golden left to become defensive coordinator with the Bengals back in the NFL. So Freeman hires Chris Ash instead. And Freeman was asked if Mickens' role has changed and, how to keep him invested in staying in the same position with a new coordinator now in place.
His role is always continuing to grow based off the confidence that the coordinator has in him, right? And I think that's something that was built through 3 years with Al Golden, and something that Chris Ash is learning in his time here. And that's with all three position coaches. That's with Mickens, Washington, and Max Bulla. Like, you could ask him the same question about Al Washington, who turned down the Tennessee, defense coordinator position 5 years ago, and are they ready to be coordinators? Well, Al Washington was offered a defense coordinator job in Tennessee, so I believe he is. right? I believe Mike Mickens is. For me, when I make decisions, it's more about what does this program need at that moment, right? And I believe at that moment we needed Chris Ash because of the traits that he brought to this program, the traits that we lost versus the traits that I wanted to bring in, right? And that's what went into that decision. And so Mick is going to have a huge role. But that's, again, based off confidence that he's been able to gain out of Chris Ash.
So he talked around it a little bit there.
Yes, he did.
He ended up talking more about Chris Ash and sort of justifying, that than actually, the question, which was about, does he have more responsibilities? How can you keep him engaged? Because even if it wasn't a coordinator position, he had another opportunity reportedly to make some more money down there at Texas. But I don't know. Do you think that some of the culture stuff we were talking about, maybe just like it applies to some of these assistant coaches as well in some of their decisions, whether to stay or go?
I think there's culture. I think there's maybe the maturity of understanding that growth, like Marcus Freeman talked about, is still needed. You can jump at a position, but that doesn't mean that you're ready. And why would you jump to a position and not feel like you could be your best version in that role, right? And so I don't know if that's the honest case, but I do think that I thought it was interesting that Marcus Freeman said traits lost versus traits gained, because basically what he is saying is like this whole thing is the defensive side of the ball is kind of like a formula. You've got Bola, Washington, Mickens, and Ash. And before it was obviously Golden and not Ash. And so three of those things are staying the same. And so I think in Marcus Freeman's opinion was, well, why would I keep, what we lost? Mike Mickens is already here and can't add that back in. And so they needed to bring someone to be more kind of who Al Golden was. And so to me, it sounds like that. And this is my opinion. I just don't think that Marcus Freeman thinks that he's quite ready yet. And he still wanted Chris Ash to be there for the high leverage, high intensity, high stress moments. But Mike Mickens can still learn from him, grow from him. And as Marcus Freeman says, build his confidence. And I think once that confidence level gets to a certain, meter, that's when Mike Mickens is going to leave and say, yeah, I'm ready to be a defensive coordinator somewhere. So I hope that Mike Mickens and Marcus Freeman had that honest conversation, and Mike Mickens is in agreement. And it's not like an envious situation where, he feels like he's being held back or restricted or not trusted by any means. And so again, I thought it was really interesting because Chris Ash obviously brings something to the table that Mike Mickens couldn't with Al Golden's departure.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested.
A lot of experience as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
That's
but also
thing.
What is that too? Like, what is Chris Ash going to be good at? What is his kind of, like
his calling
his
card,
signature moment type thing?
Yeah. We don't know yet. We'll find that out as we go along. It feels like Marcus Freeman obviously feels like he knows what that might be, but from our perspective, only time is going to tell. Because we haven't got a chance to actually see him call a game and do it live. But the good thing is you do still have Mike Mickens. So, those guys, Freeman and Mickens, obviously go back to Cincinnati, and it feels like they're on the same page with what's going on. And I think that that's probably just the most important thing, because Mike Mickens is valuable to Notre Dame and to Marcus Freeman and the coaching staff, and the whole thing, and vice versa. So like a continual sort of growing, rolling process, I think, for everybody. Decaf wants to know if the press conference was in the men's room. Lots of echo. Well, again, this was not a formal press conference, so it wasn't mic'd up like you would have, and it wasn't broadcast on YouTube or any of that. It was just Marcus Freeman and a bunch of guys sitting around in a room. So the audio quality is not, like peak, but you have the audio. So hopefully, like, something is better than nothing in this case, considering it's June 2nd. Because I know I appreciate Marcus Freeman talking and Vince D'Addario recording. I will say that. Interesting question that came up about injuries, I thought. And the question, it was talking about the conditioning of the team and balancing physical practices while also being able to stay as healthy as possible. I'm interested to see where your notes go on this one.
Whoa.
I think we practiced close to 15% more, if not, I have the numbers in my office, than we've ever had. And it was the healthiest season we've had in my time in terms of injuries for practice, right? There were some non-preventable injuries in the game that it happens. Like, if you look at the patterns over years across, the pattern's going to tell us that we're going to have probably one of the healthiest years in terms of non-preventable injuries in the game. That's just what the graphs tell you. But when you talk about practice injuries, it was the healthiest season we've had, and we practiced a lot more this past year. And so it's a constant conversation we have with sports performance staff, right? And I got to be willing to bend a little bit. Like, it's not, hey, let's shorten things. It's like, how do we ebb and flow practice? How do I wave practice in a way to keep our players safe, right? And I got to be willing to hear, hey coach, we got to change a little bit. Hey, we're running hot. Let's pull back a little bit. And then I got to make decisions. Like, I don't like to sometimes, but to me, you have to if you have a good plan. If you have a good plan, as you go out and practice and then be adaptable to what the science is telling you.
He was a little more emphatic with his talking. Does it surprise you to hear that their injuries and practices were as low as they were last year?
It does surprise me, but I think it's also a big credit to the new man in town. I always say his name wrong, but I think it's Lauren Landau, right?
Lando. You hear both.
Pish posh.
Yeah.
Tomato. No, and I think that's huge because when you talk about a guy that has a ton of NFL experience, that's what he brought to the table in terms of extended seasons. And we just saw Notre Dame play basically an NFL season with the amount of games that they played. And so I think it's really smart that Marcus Freeman was able to bring in a guy like that, knowing kind of what was on the horizon. I don't think if you ask Marcus Freeman, hey, we're going to play 16 weeks in a national championship, that's what the ultimate plan was, but you were prepared to do it if you had to by hiring someone like Landau. So I think that's great. And I think the other big thing that you heard from that is Marcus Freeman, to me, is this kind of like rough shell of old school Ohio State trestle football, 2-a-days, we're full pads, we're hitting each other all the time. That was, 2 decades ago, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's got that kind of mindset and approach, but then you have to respect that he still, utilizes kind of some of the modern day, as you would say, analytics, even just, talking about practice and stuff like that. So I think that's a good combination because you heard him say, I don't like to do it, but I have to be able to adapt. And so I think that's huge. And there's ways, I think the last major point is he has to be adaptable as a coach to find ways to get more out of practice in terms of you don't have to just hit each other the entire time, right? And so one of my favorite things was at practices, we'd always have, kind of like walkthrough periods before practice where you're just kind of taking mental reps. You're going through kind of the stuff that you went through in the film room or that you drew up on the board in terms of plays and formations or maybe key reads and recognition. And so you can do more kind of, pre-practice mental work that's still practice, but you're not, again, hitting each other the entire time. So I think that's a really good compliment to Marcus Freeman of finding ways to practice 15% more, but have, the least amount of practice-related injuries and have the success that they did of playing in a national championship.
Yeah, and like you would think that when you're practicing that much more because your season goes so many more games, 4 more games in a month and a half, basically, almost 2 months by the time it's all said and done, that you would have more of that stuff, that fatigue, because that's when a majority of those kind of injuries happen, when you are fatigued, that's
compromised.
Right. That's when that stuff tends to happen. But, you know, like think about not this past season, but the year before, pre-Lando, you know, they had a bunch of hamstring injuries and some quads and, you know, calves, you know, all this different kind of like those kind of things. That's what you point to, you know, in terms of, is the strength coach doing his job? It's not the ACLs and the MCLs and those kind of things, because those kind of things, you know, like one, they happened predominantly on the field on Saturdays, and two, that's just not something that the strength coach is going to be able to prevent when those kind of injuries happen, especially when you've got guys getting their legs rolled up on and, you know, all that different kind of stuff. So I think it's outstanding, you know, like where they are, because that was part of the reason for Marcus Freeman. Now, obviously, it took him, you know, till the end of the season before he made the hire of Lando. You know, 2 years ago, they went with an interim, you know, after they, you know, decided to make that move after Bayless left. But part of the thing, you know, like you talked about old school, and that was kind of Bayless's thing. He was like more old school, you know, like, you know, strength, brute strength, that kind of stuff. And you need some of that, but you also need some of the other stuff, you know, the conditioning aspect, the, you know, like the dynamic, the ability to be more dynamic, all that kind of stuff. And you look at the way, go ahead.
Overall, it's just muscle endurance, you know, like you can have the big muscles, but do you have the quick twitch? Do you have the endurance kind of type you know, simulation? I think, again, that's where I believe Landau specializes is, and that was kind of a huge difference in this season, is because obviously you need your key players to be out there at the end of the season when you're playing your most important games. Uh-oh.
Vince D'Addario checking in.
The Dean of Discipline.
What's up, fellas?
He is here, ready to make a little segue.
Last thing I wanted to say, did you see #1 Vanderbilt lost to Wright State at home?
I did see 5-4, I believe, right?
They almost blew it. It was like 5-1 in the 9th. And I was actually watching live after being at the Cubs game yesterday, and they threw up the stat. First time a #1 has ever lost in a regional. Like
really?
overall number
one. Overall number one.
Overall number one.
So it was single elimination? Like they're done?
No, it's double elimination, but that was their second loss.
That was their second loss. Wow.
Yeah. Yep. Because I
Wright
think they got beat by
Dayton, Ohio, baby.
Yeah. Crazy days. The mighty Vandy bowing out. Are you going to bow out now, Jess?
I am going to bow out. That is my cue to also bow out.
All right. Well,
you're welcome. You're welcome.
I'm going to get a workout in, all right? I'm actually going to exert energy.
You do that.
Oh, boy. I wanted dinner, but whatever. I guess I'll wait a little while longer.
Okay. Goodbye.
See ya. So let me ask you, Vince, like, give us a picture, because Decaf was asking about, you know, like the sound quality of the audio. Like,
sure.
Give us a picture of the setup of the room you were in with
Marcus Freeman. It was a conference room that's right off of his office, and nice conference room, nice big conference room, right? And so he sat at the head of the table, and he was at the head of the table to my right, so I'm on his left, and there was Tom Noy, then there was Mike Barandino, then there was another person, and then there was me. So I was like 4 down. You know, I was about midway at the table, and so I just stuck the thing right in front of me. And then Brian was right across.
Yeah, don't ask Tom Noy to run your recorder for you. He'll yell at you.
I wasn't even. I don't want to touch my phone. Brian was right across from me, and then there were more people to his left, my right. So he and I ended up being kind of on the end, although Tyler James was to my left, so I wasn't on the far end. And then there were some other Notre Dame personnel on the other end of the table, kind of monitoring the situation. So I wasn't super close, but I wasn't super far away either.
Okay. All right.
Hopefully that's helpful. Get a visual.
And like I said, this was not like a regular press conference, because he's not standing up there at the microphone and that kind of thing.
No,
just like you described. right there.
Yeah, we were just hanging out at a conference table, and we all got to ask 2 questions, and it was literally random as to who got to go when. And I ended up getting the second set of questions, which I was not prepared for. Or I shouldn't say not prepared for. I was not ready to be
not prepared to be number 2.
Correct. I knew what I wanted to ask, but yeah, it was interesting because I figured I would have to kind of we had a bunch of topics we wanted to hit on, Brian and I figured I would have to cross things off as we went along. That other people were going to ask those questions. I wasn't anticipating being able to choose whatever I wanted to ask because whoever went first didn't touch any of the questions we were going to ask. You know what I mean? So I literally had a pick of the litter when it was my turn. I was like, oh, let's talk O-line.
Let's do it.
Yep.
Let's do it. All right. Good stuff. And we, again, always appreciate the opportunity to get to talk with the big man, the head man. From a personal aspect, wish that maybe it was a different weekend and not when I had my vacation.
I know, right? But
no one's going to bend to that. So
speaking of your vacation, though, he was much more it's off season, right? So he was a little bit more laid back. It was
more chilled. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's wearing not sweatpants, but you know what I mean? I don't know. It wasn't sweatpant material, but sweatpant I guess. I don't know. Okay. He dresses too cool for me, so I don't even know what I would even call it. But he was comfortable, and he was very comfortable in his answers. You know what I mean? He was just more of a laid back situation, which is nice to kind of see him step out of being head coach. You know what I mean? So it was nice
because literally the cameras were not on.
So 100%. Yes, that is exactly correct. There were no cameras in the room. So,
okay, Vince. Are you ready for rapid fire?
Oh, that's what I'm here for. Literally.
All right.
That's it.
All right. We've got a late game edition, some breaking news out of Notre Dame baseball that we'll get to here in a few minutes, but I'm going to start with this. During his session with the media last week, Marcus Freeman asked about the importance of having a presence in Los Angeles and how that could impact Notre Dame's recruiting in the future if the USC series does not continue.
We're such a national brand, right? And we recruit coast to coast, but we've done a really good job in the state of California, the West Coast, but more than that, just all of West Coast, Hawaii. You're talking about Hawaii, to California, Wyoming. Keep going, right? It's important that they understand that we sell, I think more than that, we play coast to coast. We play from New York to California, right? We go to Florida this year, we're in Texas, that's what Notre Dame does. And to eliminate that, it really wouldn't be beneficial for us.
I don't know, might miss out on that Wyoming presence, I guess. So what does that say to you, Vince, about Notre Dame having a Southern California presence potentially going forward, pending what happens with this USC series?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think it's Southern California specifically that he wants to maintain. I think it's just that he wants to maintain a coast-to-coast presence.
Getting out west to whatever extent.
And he didn't have to worry about that before because he was always guaranteed to have that LA game when he plays USC every other year. So that box was just automatically checked. If that goes away, now obviously you have to figure out what you're going to do to make sure that you're on the West Coast. You know what I mean? So there has to be some extra thinking involved. I didn't get the sense that it had to be in LA or it had to be in Southern California or anything like that. He just wants to make sure he maintains the fact that Notre Dame is a coast-to-coast team and plays anywhere and everywhere. And that has always been the mantra of Notre Dame, even back in Newt Rockne days. That's how this whole thing got started in the first place. It's we'll play anybody, but bring it on. And that's who Notre Dame is. And I think he wants to maintain that. And he wants to maintain a presence. I didn't get that in California.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I pulled from it as well. And he didn't say it, but obviously at a very minimum, as long as the Stanford series continues, and we've kind of looked side-eyed at the Stanford series a little bit the last couple of years because the state of where they are, at a very minimum, they're getting out there to Stanford every other year right now. They'll be out there in Palo Alto at the end of the season. So even though it's Northern California, you're still on the West Coast. And the question will be, do they want that every year? Do they feel like they've got to get out west every year like they are right now? But even if that's the case, okay, does maybe Oregon come into play? Does a series with Washington come into play? UCLA that we've talked about.
Use that Vegas site. Use, these NFL teams, like that kind of stuff.
Shamrock series. Yeah. Whether it's in Los Angeles or Vegas.
I think you can be real creative with it, right, Sean? I mean, look, I want to be on record. I'm not saying to get rid of the USC game. I want the USC game every year. But you can also,
and so does he. He said that, and I know you guys talked specifically about that last week. So we're kind of like
no uncertain terms, like
beating that drum for a while.
And he said he's like black and white. He goes, "I want this." Like no question. If anybody asks me, I want it, and I want it as well. But I also think even if you move it to the front of the schedule and you drop Stanford from an every year scenario, you still have that off year where you're not in California. And so that allows more creativity with the schedule and some different things that you can do. And I think that there's a lot of things that are open to that, where you could get a game out there, Shamrock Series, whatever the case may be.
Well, they played Arizona. No, it hasn't been regularly, but they've played Arizona State from time to time over the years. Does a series with Arizona State makes sense? Because it doesn't get you to the coast, but
we're going to have that conversation here in a little bit, aren't we?
Yeah, we will talk about Arizona State. That's right.
Did my homework.
There you go, baby.
But I think you can pick a Big 12 team and different things like that. Like again, being I think creative with the schedule. I think you could take an Arizona State and play them in Vegas, right? I think you could take a Washington and play them, in Levi Stadium or whatever the heck they call San Francisco's, football stadium. Yeah. There's different things I think that you can do and still be out there and have a presence and get accomplished what you want to accomplish if you're Marcus Freeman.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that could throw a wrench into all of this is if the SEC and the Big Ten do end up doing that scheduling agreement, because if the SEC finally bumps up to 9 games and then those two conferences are playing against each other, like that probably is going to, and that's obviously it's going to impact USC since they're part of the Big Ten. It's going to have an impact on the desire of those schools to not only play an SEC school but also Notre Dame. How much is that going to impact Notre Dame's ability to schedule teams from either one of those conferences?
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. So then it's Big 12, and who wouldn't want to play Coach Prime at Mile High?
There you go.
There you go.
So last season was the first season that Freeman had Anthony Tresh on the sidelines as his director of analytics, and Freeman talked a little bit about the impact of that.
Yeah, I mean, he is obviously my right-hand man on game day in terms of game management decisions. But a lot of that work is done throughout the week. I mean, we meet 4 times a week to learn, right? To learn from our experiences, from other people's experiences, but also to prepare, right? Hey, the first couple of days we might get together and say, okay, let's learn from our game, let's learn from the NFL, let's learn from other college teams. What would I do in that situation? What would you do? Would you accept the penalty? Would you go for it? All these different situations. And then as we get closer to the game day, we start saying, okay, what's the plan? Hey, what's the book telling us where we're going to go for it? Let me communicate with the coordinators. Where's the kick line and all those different things. But that's in terms of game management. But he also has a lot of value in terms of helping in the personnel with using analytics in terms of evaluation. And that's been something that he's done a terrific job doing.
I mean, it's hard for us watching a game to really know how an analytics director impacts any of this stuff. Now, we know that he was standing behind, Marcus Freeman. It was much more obvious at the beginning of the season when the camera shots have like Freeman turning back and talking to him and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, what do you think about this? How much impact do you think that Tresh had last year?
Well, I think it's unfortunate for him the way kind of things went down with his introduction to Notre Dame football because, with the NIU loss and everything, people were looking for reasons. They were looking for the why, right?
And you got to have a scapegoat. Yep.
And he was an easy target because of the looking over the shoulder and things like that. And you saw less and less of that because I think, and Brian and I kind of touched on this in the show on Thursday, was that anytime that you have a new coach that's added to the staff, or you have a new person that you're trying to communicate with in any line of work, you've got to kind of learn how to communicate with that person.
Right.
And that was game 2. Like,
and again, kind of going back to what we were talking about with some of the live situations for quarterbacks, earlier, it's like you're not going to have a lot of live situations and practices for the coaches. Right. And you only figure that out when the quote unquote bullets are flying.
Correct.
Right. Like,
that's
there's
the
a
thing.
Little trial by error on game day.
So like they have, like, when we go to practice with, when they do some team stuff, like they'll throw on the headsets and they'll talk to each other and they'll try to replicate a little bit, but there's nothing like Anthony Tresh isn't on the headset at practice. Like, that's not something that you would do because you're not making those kinds of decisions in practice. Practice, everything's scripted. Like, you know what you're doing, right? And so it's just a matter of calling plays and things like that. And so you have to learn, like Brian and I talked about, like, I've been on headsets with coaches who, like head coaches, that they don't want to hear your voice unless they specifically ask you a question, right? And then there's other coaches that want like a dialogue as to how things are going and your thoughts and all that. But you have to learn that. Like, you don't know that before you're there in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a learning curve there. And I get people like, why is he just that? Why doesn't he just use his own brain? Well, he uses him as a
Why would you hire a director of analytics if you weren't going to use him?
And they meet 3 to 4 times a week. They go over things that happen all over the place. And it's his job, it's Tresh's job to bring those scenarios to Marcus Freeman so that they can discuss them, so that they're not surprised on game day and they can kind of make decisions on the go.
And the other thing is, as the head coach, because I mean, we don't have to mention him by name, but like, as a head coach, though, there's so many things that are going through your mind as a game is unfolding, from the last play to what are you going to call on the next, all these different things.
Yeah.
And so to have someone whose sole purpose is to essentially, be the Zach Galifianakis character, like in The Hangover, with all the, algorithms and, everything else. Like, he's the guy with the data.
Correct.
He's the guy who is supposed to know this stuff inside and out, so that's why you have that guy there. And that's why, you don't just have Marcus Freeman, sort of like freewheeling and dealing out there, like, because the numbers also help remove emotion from the process.
Yep.
That's a big part of it as well. He's the guy with the numbers. There's numbers over here and there's human emotion over here. Now, you still need some of that human emotion / feel for the game, or, whatever you want to call it. But, you've got those two ends of the spectrum.
Sure.
But having the numbers guy there helps you bring both of those into the middle to help you make more informed and better decisions over the course of the game.
He's the emotional guardrail, right? I mean, he's the one that's kind of keeping you on track and, things like that. And he got a lot of crap for that after the NIU game, is that, why you turn into this guy, asking him questions and all of those kinds of things. But it really does sound like they got into a groove as the season went on with how they prepared and how they did things. And they even had like hand signals that they would use with each other, so they wouldn't even have to like verbally communicate and, all of these different things. And again, like any coach relationship, you start to get shorthand with people and you start to get those communication pieces that make things easier, make things quicker, and all that. And so in game 2, that just wasn't there, and that's okay. It just wasn't there. And so I think overall it's a great move. I think it's a great move.
And the fact that, as he said, they meet during the week. It's not just on game day that all of a sudden now we're going over this stuff, because the data accumulates over the course of the season. And, like, this works, like this kind of play works in this down and distance, those kind of things. And that's things that they can talk about as they're developing their game plans for whatever game. But again, you're only going to have that as you're together and you're going through that rhythm of the season, and you're able to continually have those meetings.
Right.
And by the end of the season, really nobody even noticed,
exactly
on the sideline.
Well, that's the thing. So like, as a head coach and especially a head coach in 2025, right? They brought in a general manager, right? And he talked exhaustively about how nice it is to have somebody to deal with all that extra crap that he doesn't have to deal with now. Mm-hmm. The money talk and all that. He's like, if a player comes and asks me about money, I tell him to go talk to Mike. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have anything to do with that. It's the same thing here. Anthony Tresh is going out there and he's watching games and he's doing all these different things and he's bringing these scenarios. He's compiling all of them. He's bringing them to Marcus Freeman. They're having those conversations. And so Marcus Freeman doesn't have to sit there and watch all of these different games and find all these scenarios and think, okay, what would I have done in that moment? Anthony brings that to him. They have that discussion. They put it in the memory banks. They write it down, whatever the case may be, so that if that happens to them, they're ready to roll. Like they talk about why and what and all those different. So like, I think it is genius. It's one less thing Marcus Freeman has to worry about.
That's exactly it.
He's also ready to go.
Yeah. It's another tool. Yeah. And it helps I think just like thinking about those things, going over a lot of those different things with him over the course of the week is just going to put, another set of knowledge into his own head and just things that he can sort of be prepared for when they come up.
100%. Because you can never be too prepared, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole point of this. You can never be too prepared. And I think at first when they hired him, I was like, is that necessary? Like, don't you have like your little card that says if you should go for it, whatever.
Right.
But when he started talking about what they talk about, it's like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense because there's a million different scenarios that can come into play that you've never experienced, especially as a third-year head coach.
Exactly.
You've never had to make those calls, So I think it's an invaluable piece, the way they're using it.
Some breaking news this afternoon. Notre Dame baseball's best player has entered the transfer portal. Catcher Carson Tinney is in the portal. Decaf put me onto it, and I looked it up while as you were joining in the show just a little bit ago, Vince, and he has indeed entered the transfer portal. So this means what to you? I'm kind of throwing this on you.
It's okay. Now. It just means that, Sean Stifler is going to have to do a really good job to retain his guys, and he's going to have to go and recruit hard and, try to keep his guys together. Look, baseball is more than one guy. So, I mean, if you lose one guy, obviously it hurts. But if a floodgate's open and a bunch of guys are jumping in, then you're looking at a problem. I'm not saying you can replace him with one guy, but you're going to have to do something to replace him.
They've lost, I think, at least 3 pitchers as well. Maybe, I don't know if they've lost now, different, to different degrees, but this is definitely their best offensive player. This is a sophomore who just exploded on the scene this year. Like as a team, they hit 66 home runs. He had 17 home runs, 53 RBIs, a 753 slugging percentage, a 498 on base, a 348 batting average. He was the Triple Crown, like the team Triple Crown leader for Notre Dame, and very well thought of nationally in terms of national awards and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, like I just, I realize that it is the transfer portal era, and when you're on an average team and you're the best player on an average team, you're going to have some big opportunities to go someplace. Like Purdue had a first baseman, I think that who announced he was entering the transfer portal, who had a huge offensive season for the Boilermakers this year.
So what's going to happen, though?
It's going to happen, but at the same time, it's also going to happen if you are an average team and all you've got is like 1 or 2 good players. You know what I mean? Like we were talking about the culture of Notre Dame football and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that Sean Stifler's got a bad culture. I'm not saying that by any means, but it's like something's got to happen here pretty quick for this program because it's year 3. You were 11th in the ACC. And if you look at their hitting numbers and their pitching numbers, that's basically where they ranked, like 11th, 12th in both of those departments. They were just across the board, like the 11th best team in the ACC this season. And it's not going to get any easier when you lose a stud sophomore catcher like this,
And that's, the youth is what made Notre Dame who Notre Dame was. And they needed to retain that youth. And this is obviously an instance of not retaining that youth. So hopefully they can, put the fence around everybody else and see what happens.
And it is also one of the frustrations of college coaches is you get a stud like that and now he's gone.
Yeah.
After he has one good year, but he'll probably end up somewhere else in the ACC or the SEC and make some big fat money. So Brian says, bring back Jesse Woods. He left, and I believe Jesse is still coaching Division III. He's a head coach out there on the East Coast, I believe, in Massachusetts. But he was really good coach. Wasn't the head coach, but a good hitting coach nonetheless. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Arizona State head coach Kenny Dillingham says his Sun Devils could become a college football blue blood of the 2020s. He pointed to the success that Clemson has had since Dabo Swinney took over in 2008, saying, quote, they just showed up. People think they've been around forever, end quote.
It's great for Kenny. It's a great line. I'll believe it when I see it. Now, I realize you're in the Big 12 and you've got an opportunity to be the big fish over in the Big 12. And this, there's no opportunity like the present, obviously. And I like Kenny Dillingham as a coach. I do. I think having a 16-team playoff is an opportunity for more teams to, more regularly get into the playoff and things like that and be able to make a name for themselves and things like that. I would hesitate to start comparing myself to Clemson just yet. I think that's a bit of a stretch. But, I mean, look, Clemson.
I get the analogy he's trying to make. Because he's right. But it's also been 1 year.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like, look, Clemson's in the heart of the SEC country too, by the way. They're in the middle of Alabama. Like, slow down just a skosh. Or, I just do it for a few years, then let's have a talk about being a blue blood. Let's stop throwing that word around.
Yeah, that's a little bit. It's a little bit much because honestly, it's not like I consider Clemson a blue blood. I consider them a really good team of right now. They've won a couple national championships.
Yeah.
Great, but I don't consider Clemson a blue blood college football program by any means.
Right.
But and again, I understand the analogy he's trying to make, but 1 year, how about you do it? How about you do it for a few years and then let's have a talk about any of that kind of stuff? Because I've always felt like when you consider the weather situation, now obviously it's very hot in the summer, during your training camp and even, like into the middle of October still when you're down there in the desert, but it doesn't rain a lot. You've got a lot of sunshine. You're in a big city. Like all those things have always felt like Arizona State's athletic programs should all be better, more consistently than what they are. But it's never been like that. And it's not like, especially for football, like the Pac-12 was some murderer's row when they were playing in the Pac-12. And where were they then? I
just love to remind people, this is the same team in the same season, by the way, that was holding open tryouts for kickers. Like you're not a blue blood if you're doing that. So, and this is the same year that you made it into the college football playoff. You know what I mean? So let's put a full season together and then maybe another one after that.
Well, and the other aspect of this is they got in because their league got an automatic bid.
Solid point. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, would they have gotten in if the Big 12, like they might have just slid in if the bids weren't guaranteed. And even then, I don't even know if they slide in because I think that Alabama and Ole Miss probably get more consideration than Arizona State at that point.
I mean, listen, Arizona,
if there's no auto bid for winning your conference.
Arizona State and Scadaboo and the whole thing, it was a cute story. It just didn't go anywhere. You know what I mean? Like it just didn't go anywhere. It didn't have legs. And right now, like if they would have made a run to the national championship, I would entertain at least the conversation that he's trying to put forth. I'm not even prepared to do that because they didn't compete in the national, in the national landscape. They didn't compete. You competed in the Big 12. Awesome. Now you got to start beating some other teams, and then we can have a conversation. Right. I get it. It's recruiting fodder. He wants to run the Big 12, and it's like, it's like when you're a head coach, Sean. It's like, okay, first we got to win like our division, then we got to win the conference, then we got, like baby steps, my man. Like let's one step at a time.
Exactly. The National Football Foundation has announced an adjustment to College Football Hall of Fame eligibility criteria that's going to now open the door for the late Mike Leach to get into the Hall. The previous requirement for coaches to get into the College Football Hall of Fame was they had to win at least 60% of their games. Leach's career winning percentage is .596. And so the Hall has dropped the requirement to .595. Do you buy or sell this change?
I buy it because I don't think there should be a winning percentage like caveat in the first place.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
We're on the same page with this.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't, first of all, I didn't even realize.
That's to me, it's like just get rid of that requirement and then you don't have to change it like this.
Correct. I didn't even know that was a thing until I had heard this. Didn't even know it was a thing. And it shouldn't be a thing because if you look at let's use Mike Leach specifically. If you look at his contribution to the game of football, he was way more impactful to the game of football than, say, Larry Coker was. You know what I mean? Or name a coach, right? There's a bunch of coaches out there that you could say the same thing about.
Larry Coker, for the most, I don't know. I was about to say he drafted, but I mean, the guy did win a championship. So
he did. But once it was like his team, he wasn't winning anything. You know what I mean? Like I think you or I could have been put in charge of that team and probably could have won a national title. Like he was gifted a hell of a roster, and
sure.
And I realize you're still the head coach. You still got to do all the things. But at the same time, it's like I still say Mike Leach. And by the way, Larry Coker had a .647 winning percentage. And then you've got Mike Leach, who had below a .600 winning percentage, way more impact to the game of college football, right? I mean, we can all agree on that.
Gene Chizik, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Title. Yeah, exactly. I think gone are the days that we'll see a Gene Chizik win a national championship.
I think so too.
Again,
I think so
Decaf
too.
Is asking, is he Hall of Fame worthy? I mean, he was an innovator. He and Hal Mummy created the air raid offense, and look how prevalent the air raid offense is today. Like from that aspect, and from the fact that he did win games at non-traditional schools, like Texas Tech. Like Texas Tech wasn't winning a lot of football games before Mike Leach showed up. Washington State had some periods, but they didn't win before Mike Leach showed up. So like from that aspect, I think he is. But to your point, like I don't like the fact that they lowered the standard. I would rather them just get rid of this number and not go by that, because now you're lowering it from 60% to .595, and it's basically they should just call it the Mike Leach rule.
I know, right?
It's basically just to by what 1/1000th of a point, it's just low enough that you can get Mike Leach in. So what happens when the next guy comes around?
Right.
And he's got a .594. Are you going to lower it to .590, to make sure that guy gets in as well? Just get rid of this stupid number, because it's fairly arbitrary anyway, and just go off how significant was the guy? How significant was this person to the sport of college football? I think that's what you need to do. You don't need these kind of numbers placed on.
It's just it's silly. Like either you're Hall of Fame worthy or you're not. Like I realize it's not necessarily black and white, but we have this discussion all the time when it comes to baseball players, right? Whether their numbers are good enough, and all of those things. Like his impact on the game of football is undeniable. It's undeniable. He belongs in the Hall of Fame, period. And it's not because he passed away early or any of that kind of stuff. It's what was his impact to the game of football. It is long lasting and impactful, and he belongs in there. No questions asked. You need to do away with the winning percentage. This is ridiculous.
Yep, exactly. Like Decaf is saying Leach was an average coach at best. Again,
an innovator, man.
Right. He's an innovator, and the fact that the places that he coached, like Texas Tech and Washington State in the era that he was coaching, were never going to play for a national championship. But just getting either of those programs to bowl games consistently was a pretty high step up from where he was. And I think that he probably scared a lot of athletic directors because he was so quirky and you never knew what he was going to say and all that kind of stuff. And obviously he ran into a little controversy with Craig James's kid and all that stuff when he was at at Texas Tech, and
they lock him in a shed or whatever. It's
right. Crazy, but I mean, he won. Like Craig says, he won. Craig D, not Craig James. He won everywhere he went, and more specifically, he won at a higher level at those places that hadn't won before he got there. Like that's like the fact that he had the winning percentage that he has, considering the places he coached, and essentially the fact that he had to do more with less. I mean, he absolutely belongs in.
Yeah.
But like I said, I just think you need to get rid of this winning percentage requirement. Like there are no number stipulations, stat qualification stipulations like that for players. Like players have to have, at least been an All-American X amount of times. I think that's the biggest thing, but like you don't have that with coaches. And I don't think you need something like that with coaches.
Yep.
So that's the only problem I have with it. So there's a change to the college football spring calendar, Vince, that is being considered. It would include 6 non-contact OTA style practices that would take place in May or June for college football teams. Do you buy or sell this idea for college football?
So I'm selling it for May. I'll buy it for June. Like May is the only time that these guys get to go home.
Yeah.
That May
makes no sense that you would have it in May.
No.
Unless it's like the first week of May or something like that.
Because they're graduated. Like these kids are gone. They get to go home for a couple of weeks. Like I get that they're being paid and all these different things. But you know what? Even people that get paid get vacation. They get to go home and they get to not be at work.
Yeah.
Okay. So like let these kids go home for a couple of days. They all return in June, right? You've got all the football camps on campus, for all the high school kids in June. So a lot of the times the kids are, obviously all those kids are back on campus. Do it in June. You're there. Yeah. So now you're allowing basically the coaches to get involved during June and not just the strength and conditioning coaches. Okay, cool. It's a non-padded practice. You're going through some drills, maybe you're going through some skelly, things like that. Fine. Do it in June. Absolutely 1,000% against it in May. Not only are the kids having a chance to get a little vacation, but the coaches get a chance to have a little vacation too. The week that we went to go visit Marcus Freeman, or last Thursday, we reached out to a couple of assistant coaches, he's like, we're off this week. Like he goes, Marcus gave us the week off. You know what I mean? He's like, I'm working on the honeydew list. Like the coaches deserve some time off too. Like even coaches and players get a vacation. Let it happen. Absolutely not in May.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I don't know if May is included. Like, I don't know what the trimester, like schools that are on trimesters, like what those calendars look like or any of that kind of stuff. But it absolutely makes sense because OTAs are basically non-padded practices. Yeah. It's like you put on a helmet and your jersey. It's like your shells stuff. And you go out there and you run a few plays. So like it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like they come back. I think it's
usually,
for example, Notre Dame comes back around June 9th or something like that. So if you did it kind of as they're starting, like their summer school and their conditioning type stuff, you get them out there for an hour and they're able to actually run some plays and do that kind of stuff. Why wouldn't you? Because again, they're there anyway, and they're going to be doing, OTA is organized team activity. They're actually doing other, I guess they're not technically considered team activities,
but they're getting together,
conditioning and stuff like that. They're still they're doing stuff. They're on campus. You might as well do something that's going to help them, also kind of get their mentals together 100%. When it comes to playing football. So why not?
As a coach, if you're telling me there's going to be 5 or 6 like OTA style practices in June of the whole month, it's like once a week. Like no problem. Let's get out there. Let's get these kids in. Let's do this. Let's have a 2-hour practice with no pads. Like that's no problem. Like coaches would welcome that because like somebody in the chat said, It's a chance for summer transfers to get their feet wet. It's a chance for coaches to see these guys doing some things. Look, coaches are seeing stuff. Obviously, they're not coaching, all of that. Be nice to be like, okay, I see what you're doing. Try this or do it this way. So they're not developing bad habits, things like that in the 7-on-7s and things like that.
Well, it also gives them a chance. Like they're done with the spring. They've got film on them from their spring practices. It gives them a chance to, kind of review some of that and then say, okay, let's put this to practical use.
Yes,
here,
absolutely.
With some plays on the field before training camp gets started. And then you get into your thick, heavy summer conditioning and all that.
Because look, stuff. All the players are there. All the coaches are there, but they're not allowed to interact. You know what I mean? So having a couple times where they're allowed to interact, I'm okay with.
Yep. Colby is where Jesse Woods, the former Notre Dame assistant, coaches. Brian says his son played for him. I think I remember Brian saying that previously. Big Jesse Woods out there at Colby.
Nice.
On the East Coast. All right, well, that's going to do it for today. Vince, appreciate you jumping in. We kind of you had a busy day. Jesse had a busy day. Mine was not necessarily busy, but it was just
busy enough.
First part of the day was just very lethargic after coming back from
I get it
vacation, trying to get the cobwebs out today.
It looked like you had a really good time though.
Had a blast.
There we go.
There were a lot of beverages drank. That's part of why I felt the way this morning as well. First time 3 days in a row like that. So
that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Saw some dudes that we hadn't, the majority of them, it had been 30 plus years.
That's
so
crazy.
It was a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
So yes, now we're talking. There's already talk about next year.
There we go.
Getting more people. So for some reason, I keep getting put in charge of event planning.
Well, tell them bring them to South Bend.
I guess I planned this first one too well. Yeah.
Oh, you planned this one? Look at you.
I did. Yes.
Wow. No wonder you guys went to a baseball game.
Of course. Absolutely. We saw those hideous Padres City Connect uniforms.
Oh, what are
they look more like Miami Vice. They're like pastels.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Was not a fan. They played the Pirates, and the Pirates uniforms looked more like the Padres real uniforms.
Ththose are awful.
Yeah.
It looks like Miami. Those are colors for Miami. Those aren't San Diego colors.
I agree.
Yeah, that's not good.
Completely agree.
Pink and mint.
Yep. I know. All right, appreciate everyone being here. Hit the like button, and we will be back mañana on IB Nation Sports Talk.